Okay, great. Let me just share my screen with the plan for today. This a second there. Okay, so today is going to be an introduction to data wrangling. Data wrangling basically means any sort of manipulation that you do to data tables to get the data in the format that you want, get rid of unnecessary data, and just like work on whatever you're interested in at the moment. So how it's going to work today, we're going to go over announcements, and then we're going to just move on to a quick review and our demo, and then our breakout rooms as usual. So announcements, we do have new members who came in from the catch-up session last week. Welcome to all of them. Everybody should be at the same level right now, so you're all good. We do have a Google Drive for homework assignments. That is just for self-accountability purposes. If you want to submit your homework each week to your Google Drive, link is in the Slack. You're more than free to do so. We won't be checking that homework drive unless you guys want us to give you feedback on your code. But otherwise, it's just for like a personal accountability purpose. Also, we have solutions for homeworks in the drive. They're already uploaded from last quarter. So you can check them anytime. Obviously, the point is to do the homework, to try to work through the entire homework without the solution, and then just peek at it if you want to check your style or check your code or functionality. And we're going to have the activity and homework combined in a single file today because it's a bit longer and a bit harder than usual. We do think that it's kind of manageable in this hour and a half, especially since we have a shorter demo. So yeah, there's just like one file, which is called homework, and that's the only file you need to work on this week. And we will be sending out a notice tomorrow morning about how to sign up for C1s with us. We're still debating whether we're gonna be offering like one-on-one, like very short meetings with you, like to discuss your ideas for independent projects, like to discuss a topic, to discuss whatever big question you want to answer, and whatever data set you already have. We can either do that or we can do it over Slack since we have more people this quarter than last quarter. So we'll figure that out between yourselves and we'll give you an official announcement on that tomorrow morning. We'll also give an official announcement tomorrow morning on office hours. So be sure to fill in the when to meet that was posted earlier in the Slack. If you just scroll up, you're going to find a when to meet. And yeah, that's for just like whatever times of the week you're generally free to meet with us for office hours. We might do office hours over Zoom, or we might just go on an individual case-by-case basis. We still have to decide that, but there's going to be an announcement on that tomorrow in the Slack. So we posted it for that. And finally, we're going to introduce Julia at some point, who is the co-president of DAMS for 2020-2021. And she also leads the data journalism section of DAMS. And Julia is going to be helping you guys craft your stories and whatever like thread you're building between your sub questions that you're trying to answer in C1s. Cool. Any questions about any of this? Okay, sounds good. So moving on to the demo. Let me just close my email unless I have present people. Yeah, wait, I'm gonna have to stop sharing for a bit and send the link to people. Just give me 1 second and I'll be back with you guys. Copy link. Send. Copy link. Send. Okay, I'm sorry for that. Great. We're ready. So, great. Just a quick review of what we saw last time. Again, any questions, just feel free to write them in the chat or just interrupt me. As always, when we open a new file, we run the Tidyverse package. And in this case, we're using another package called NYC Flights, which contains a data set. Remember to always run your packages in the first chunk. It just makes it look much more orderly. If you are ever wanting to review stuff on your own and you want to open a new R file, always go to File, New File. And then your choice is always going to be R Markdown. This is the sort of file that we use in the demos and the exercises. And this is sort of file that allows you to like make chunks and run chunks independently. So any files that you're using on your own, whether it be for your C1 or just for extra practice, use R Markdown files. That is the format that we're using. Let me just open the chat to see if I have any questions. Yeah. When to meet is in the BeginnR channel and Slack. If you don't see it, just ping us or send us a message privately through the chat. We'll figure that out with you later. Great. This is very basic review. Again, if you want to assign a variable called a and you want to give it the value 3, you just use this arrow operator. Always the command for Mac is option and then the minus sign. For Windows, I'm pretty sure it's alt and the minus sign. To make that arrow, just run this and you're going to see that a is assigned the value 3 in our global environment. Okay, and this command for assigning a variable is going to be super important when we manipulate data. Why? Because you always have to save whatever changes you're doing to a variable, whether it be like the old variable or creating a new one, because otherwise R is not going to save those changes for you. And you might think that you maybe like got rid of some data that you're not interested in, and then you open the data set again and it is still there and you're wondering why. That is because you haven't saved it by using the assignment operator. Let's just go over that in just a second. Before that though, we have again a review of read CSV, which reads any file that is a comma delimited values. I think that's the format. The first argument to read CSV, which you have over here, is the file path. Really, you don't have to write out file equals whatever, because it's going to automatically know that the first argument is the file or the file path. So you don't have to write file equals. You could just do this and you're going to be more than fine. And as always, whenever you want to copy a file or a file path, you just go to whatever file you're using. Imagine, let's say this, you right click and then you press the option button when you're in top of copy, which says copy as path name. See, when you press option, it says copy as path name. Click on that and it's going to copy the path name to your clipboard and you can just do paste and then you're good. Okay, I won't read this because this is in somebody else's laptop. I'm not going to be able to access it, but if it were a path in mine, I could just do that and access collisions. Any questions up to this point? Is it the same on Windows? I'm pretty sure there must be an option in Windows where you right click and you get the file path. But probably Nico can answer this better than I can.
Now you got it. No, yeah, it's a file path that usually you can do if you right click on a document and you go to like properties, it'll tell you this file path. And that's what you just copy paste. You just need to make sure to switch all the slashes to where they're forward facing instead of backwards facing.
So backwards is this and forward is this, right? Or this, sorry. Yep, okay, perfect. Great, so that's how you do that. Now we're gonna move on to our actual new content. The first function or command that we're gonna go over is filter, which basically goes through every row that you have in your table and it filters out rows that meet whatever condition you're using in the filter. So let's just, to make an example of this, run this chunk which has a flights data set in it. We just write the name of the data set to print it out to the console or whatever. Here we can see all the variables that the flight data set has. And imagine that we wanna only fetch the data that has June as its month. So in this case, as you can see in the month column, it's assigned an int, which means it's an integer value. That means a whole rounded number. In this case, the number for June would be 6. So we only want the rows that have month equals to 6. So we take the data set that we want to modify, put it to the left of the pipe as always, and to the right of the pipe, we put whatever function we want to apply to that data set. So in this case, our function is filter. If I just want to open the hub menu by clicking Fn, F1 in my keyboard, once I open this, there you go. Subset rows using column values, that's what I'm looking for. So it retains all rows, satisfies a condition. And this condition is going to evaluate to true or false. For example, take the first row that says 2013 month 1. The month here does not equal 6, so this row is going to evaluate to false. And since it evaluates to false, we're going to get rid of this row in the filtered data set until we get to something that has month equals 6. And that's going to evaluate to true. So that row is going to be kept in that data set. So as always, our first argument is a data set. In this case, we can just forego this argument if we put the table to the left of the pipe. And the filter function is going to interpret the data argument equal to flights. And then the ... are just expressions that are conditional values. So a conditional value is something that's like a conditional statement can be true or false. In this case, the conditional statement is whatever value you have for a month, let's say 1, has to be equal to 6. If it's equal to 6, it's going to say true, and it's going to keep that row. If it's not equal to 6, it's going to say false, and it's not going to keep that row. Any questions up to this point? Let me just open the chat to see if I have any. Yes, if you didn't install the NOC flights package, you have to install it. Yeah. Are there 2 equal signs? Yes. Whenever you want to say that something is equal to something else, in R, you always use 2 equal signs, not 1. Actually, that takes me to this chunk, which is doing the exact same thing as the chunk we were using above. This chunk uses just 1 equal sign, and it's going to give me an error. It says this usually means that you've used 1 equal sign instead of 2. So did you mean using 2 equal signs? That error message is actually very helpful. So yes, always when you're comparing values, you use 2 equal signs. Any other questions up to this point? I wanted to chat. Yeah. As Nico says, when you use like 1 equal sign, it's usually to assign a value. However, the good style for assigning a value is not equals. Instead, it is the arrow operator. So if you want to assign a value, never use a single equals thing, just use the arrow operator. Forget about single equals, just use the double equal sign to compare. Yes, so is a single equal sign and the assignment error interchangeable? In theory, yes, and in theory it's gonna work. However, it's bad style to use a single equal sign and you should just use the arrow. Yes, there is a shortcut for the arrow sign. It's option and the minus sign. So if I go to this option minus, it's gonna make the arrow sign for me. Great. Any other questions? Yeah, I think it says alt underscore in Windows. Perfect. Right, so why is this assignment arrow important? Because we need to save whatever filter data that we have here. In this case, in the chunk above that I'm highlighting with my mouse, we never saved whatever filter data that we had. We never saved this output. Imagine I run this. Sure, it's going to appear as output in your console, but this table where the month is only June is not going to be saved since we didn't use the arrow operator. Conversely, in this case, we are creating a new table called flights June, and we're assigning it to the filter data set that only contains the flights that happen in June. So let me just run this data set, this chunk, sorry, and run you through what happens. So first, we're printing out the normal flights table that we had initially. You see here in the output thing that we have 2 things that say table data frame and table data frame right here. The first one corresponds to flights. So this is the table that contains all the flights that we had initially. Then we create a new table called flights June, where we pipe in flights and filter for months equals to June. And then we print out a new table, and then we print out that table, which we just created right here. And so this is the second table, where all the flights, where all the months are equal to June. So whenever you like print 2 tables, the first table that you print is going to be on the left, second table is going to be on the right. Cool. Any questions? Oh yeah, Nico clarified that the arrow is alt minus, not alt underscore. Thanks, Nico. I'm being asked what does a double percentage sign mean? If you're talking about what it means in the pipe, it's just how you denote the pipe. It's just like the symbol for this, I guess, operator, which takes whatever is to the left of the pipe and gives it as the first argument of whatever function is to the right of the pipe. Cool. Okay, any other questions? Okay, sounds good. So always when you do a change or you wrangle data, save it to a new table. You could also save it to like just flights and delete like the June part, and this would like override the old table. However, that is not recommended, since imagine that you make a mistake and you're filtering and you want to undo, there will be no undo. So we recommend that whenever you do a new step in data wrangling, either you use a pipe or you save it to a new table, as in this case. So we can always have like the initial flights table if we want to look back at it and check or do another thing if we realize later that we made a mistake. Okay, yeah, Nico pointed out here that we're not actually changing the base data. So like, for example, as you saw here, we have a new table that has only June, but then we also have the initial flights table that is unchanged. So as Nico said, we're never changing the base data unless we're saving it to the actual flights table. And instead, we're saving that filter table to another data set in this case, or another table, flights June, to be able to like have those two versions separately. Great, so moving on to comparisons, these are whatever we use to create a conditional statement that is either true or false. As we mentioned, using one equal sign is not gonna make it, you have to do two. And then let me just go over this super quick. Here we're taking the square root of 2 and we're squaring that. Ideally, that should be exactly the same as 2, right? And here we are dividing 1 over 49 and multiplying it by 49. Ideally, that should give us 1. Now, I would expect both of these statements to print true and true in the console. However, let me run this. And they evaluate to false and false. Why do they do this? Because whenever we are doing, let's say, square root of 2, this is going to give me an irrational number that probably has like an infinite number of decimal points, right? And the computer can only store a limited amount of decimal points. So it's going to like truncate or round whatever I get for square root of 2 and store, imagine it stores like 10 decimal points that are like infinite amount of decimal points. So whenever I square that, I'm not going to get exactly 2. I'm going to get like 1.99 or like 2.001 or something. So it's not going to be exactly the same as 2. For that, in order to avoid that mistake, I'm going to use the near function. So I'm going to say, let me just open the menu, the help menu. So near takes two numbers to compare, x and y. In this case, it's going to compare the result of doing this whole thing to 2. And if both numbers are near enough, when they're converted to, like, when they're rounded or converted to an integer, then this is going to value to true. Same case for this. When I divide 1 over 49, I should probably get an irrational number with an infinite amount of decimal places. I'm pretty sure that's what you call it, irrational, but correct me if I'm wrong. I don't have a math background. But I'm going to get an infinite number of decimal places or a huge number of decimal places when the computer can only actually store like a very small amount of them. So when I multiply by 49, I'm not going to get 1. I'm going to get like 0.999 or like 1.001. So again, to solve that, I use near and compare whatever is in the first argument to the second argument, make sure it's close enough, and these should print true and true as they do. So whenever you have like these small things where you're like having numbers with really long decimal sequences, and you're trying to compare those two numbers, always remember to use near instead of the equals equals. So in this case, I would use like filter, and as the argument of filter, I would use this entire thing. Cool. Any questions? Let me open the chat. Any other questions? Okay, sounds good. So there, oh wait, I have one actually. Nope, okay, we're good. There's other comparison operators. This is less than or equal to. If it, imagine that I do whatever is less than or equal to 2. So if that number is 1, it's gonna be true. If it's 2, it's also gonna be true. It's less than or equal to. There's just less than, greater than or equal to, greater than, and then when we do exclamation mark and equal, that means not equal to. So in this case, I'm trying to filter the flights table for any flight that had a departure delay of less than or equal to 6 hours. Let me just run this. And if I go to departure delay, I'm gonna have like 2, 4, even negative numbers, because sometimes, you know, like the delay is negative, which means that the flight actually like takes off before its scheduled date. So yeah, that does the trick for me. I can also try all of these out, which you're gonna do in the homework. And then I have logical operators. Before I move on to those though, do I have any questions about conditional operators, comparison operators?
Yeah, I have a question. Can you do like a range, like between one number and another?
So what you would do there is, imagine I want to do between 2 and 6 inclusive. I would just put a comment, add a new argument, which says step delay is smaller than or greater than or equal to 2. There's no like single statement where you like put both end values and you just compare. You just have to do it as a new argument to filter. So like filter is first gonna look for all of the departure delays smaller than or equal to 6. And then it's going to look for all of the departure delays bigger than or equal to 2. And it's going to just choose those that meet both conditions. So for filter statements, you have to meet both conditions and you separate both conditions with a comma. Okay, so in this case, it gets rid of all the negative departure delays and uses 2 and 6 inclusive. Any other questions or any follow-ups? Okay, sounds good. Okay, for logical operators, these are things like I want to meet condition 1 and condition 2, or I want to meet condition 1 or condition 2. So for example, what this chunk right here is doing is it's taking the flight table and filtering that to see if the month is either November or December. That means that if the month is November, it's going to be kept. If the month is December, it's also going to be kept. But if the month is like March, it's not going to be kept. So let me just run this and see if I meet either of those conditions. In this case, I only meet the first condition on the left. I'm going to get true, so I'm going to keep that row. Again, if it just meets the other condition or the month is December, that's also going to validate to true. So we're good. Just as clarification, when you have condition 1 or condition 2, it's going to evaluate to true if either or both conditions are true, right? So in the case of the first row, the month is 11, so the first condition evaluates to true. The month is not 12, so the second condition evaluates to false. So I have true or false, which evaluates to true because I only have to meet at least one of these conditions. Any questions about or statements? Okay, sounds good. Be careful though. This goes back to the question that was asked on establishing the range between two numbers. You typically have to write out like month equals 11 or month equals 12. Like you can't just write month equals 11 or 12. Why? Because in CS, we have things called truthy values that evaluate to true and falsy values that evaluate to false. So in CS, like any number that is not 0 or I think negative is going to evaluate to a truthy value. So in this case, 11, the computer takes to be a true, or 12, the computer also takes to be true. So it has true or true, which is going to evaluate to true. In this case, if month equals true, then it's going to probably keep all the months. So yeah, it keeps like month 1, month 2, month 3, whatever. So whenever you're using multiple like conditions for the or, make sure that you separate them. Month equals something or month equals the other thing. It is a bit repetitive, but that's how R works. Any questions about this? Okay, cool. Yeah, so as Nico explained, since non-zero numbers evaluate to be true, 11 or 12 equals true. So it's just going to keep all the rows they have. Great. However, to make it easier and actually overriding what I said about having to write month equals something or month equals the other thing, you can use a vector. A vector is just like a list of data that is of the same type. Let me just write this vector, a list of data of the same type, such as integers, doubles, strings, etc. And how you denote it, it's by doing C and then whatever you have inside the parentheses. So this could be like number 1 and then number 2. So whenever I have C parentheses something, that means it's a vector. In this case, I have a vector that contains 11 and 12. So what I can do is I can use the in operator, which there's no shortcut for that I know of. I just have to type like percentage in percentage. So if the month is, so sort of like if the value of the month is found in 11 or 12, it's gonna evaluate to true. In this case, this works exactly the same as your first example with month equals 11 or month equals 12. It's gonna just make sure that this value is found within this vector. Any questions about this? Okay, sounds good. Vectors are super useful whenever you want to put in like multiple arguments for an OR function. Great. Also, as I was mentioning, you can have multiple conditions that the filter has to meet, and it has to meet both. So actually, instead of using an AND operator, the AND operator would be this. Instead of having to use this, you can just put a comma, and the filter statement is going to make sure that you meet both of these requirements. So in this case, it filters for month is June and day is 24. So I'm only going to get entries for the 24th of June. And if I scroll to the last column, I'm only going to get entries for the 24th of June. Great. So use a comma whenever you want the filter function to make sure that your table meets both conditions. Any questions? Okay, sounds good. We're going to skip 1.3. This you're going to do in the breakout rooms. But then we have, this we've already seen most of it, the mutate function, which creates new columns with new variables, or it just modifies existing variables that you already have. So in this case, imagine that we want to make a new column called, in the flights table, the new column is going to be called gain, and it's going to be the difference between the departure delay and the arrival delay. So if I just run that, and I scroll to the right using this arrow, the arrow again, I'm going to find a new column, which is gain, which again just like takes whatever value I have for this. For example, for the top row, the departure delay is 2 and the arrival delay is 11. So 2 minus 11 is going to be equal to 9, or sorry, minus 9, which is what I get for the gain column. So reminder, mutate goes through every single row, gets whatever value I have in that row for depth delay, whatever value we have for arrival delay, computes this gain and gives it a unique value per row. Let me just check in the chat. Okay, so if I wanted to filter from months 1 to 6, that's a good question. Let me just return to this. Let me make a new chunk. Let's call this variable anything before July. Let's just save that. And we're going to do the flights table, pipe that into a filter statement. And what we have to do is month is in. And let me just, before that, make a new variable. Let's call it allowed months. And I'm going to introduce something new, which is called a sequence. This is something we should actually teach, standardized thing. A sequence. It's like a sequence of integers that is within a certain like range, and I denote it by sec, and then I write my parameters inside. So in this case, I would write sequence goes from 1 to 6, and my step, or like my increment, is 1, right? And let me just print allowed months. Let me run this. Okay, so allowed month is basically a vector that contains all the months from 1 to 6. So from 1 inclusive to 6 inclusive, and increases every 1. Yeah, also Nico's point about using, instead of that, doing a vector from 1 inclusive colon 6 inclusive, I would do the same thing. Actually, Nico's suggestion is better. Yep. So I now have this variable, and I will do month in allowed months. And then let's print anything before July. And there we go. That is our table. Any further questions? Okay, coming back to, actually sequence is like more useful when you have like a different step. So imagine the step is like, imagine you get all the even days. So the step will be 2. If the step is 2, then this is not going to help because it's going to use 1 as a step. But if the step is 2, you're going to use a sequence from inclusive to inclusive and step. So it'd be like from 2 to 30, step 2. Okay, so coming back to this, mutate takes every single row, gets the value for whatever column that row has, whatever column I need, and makes a new column using those 2 values. Great. Actually, we can give mutate multiple arguments if we want to create multiple columns. So in this case, we're creating the gain column same as above, and we're creating a new column. Actually, we already have an airtime column. It's right here, but we're modifying it to divide over 60. Why? Because airtime, I believe, is in minutes. Imagine we're gonna have that in hours as a decimal, so we're just gonna divide by 60. Well, let me just run this, and if I scroll to the right, I'm gonna see airtime, which is this divided by 60 for each row, and then I'm also gonna see the gain, which stays the same. The position of airtime in this table is gonna stay the same just because it already existed, but any new columns, just gain is gonna be pushed to the end of the table. Just open the chat. Any questions about this? Cool. As Nico says here, we can even reference the new columns that we're creating. So these two columns are the exact same that we used in the previous example. But imagine that we want to create a new column called gain per hour, which would be how much time we gain divided by the number of hours that we have. So in this case, we're just using the new airtime calculation that we had in the last step. And that is totally valid. The computer's going to understand it as long as you change airtime before you actually call it, or you have an existing airtime before you actually use this. So yeah, that's going to work too. Great. Any questions? This is a negative gain, so it's going to be a delay. Cool. Sounds good. If you are ever in doubt and you need to just see, imagine you just want to see the departure time column. And so this column, and you don't want to see the rest of the data set, you can just use the $sign. So you put the table name on the left, $sign, column name. And this is going to print out just the departure time column from the table. So these are all the different departure times that we have. Let me just open the chat to see if I have any questions. Yeah. This vector x colon y creates a vector of integers. Is there a special format to write times? Yes, there is. There is a package called looprDate, which we're going to use, I think, later on in the course. But not now. Honestly, each table for now just has its own format. For example, the first value here would be 5 hours and 17 minutes rather than 517 minutes. So we're going to have to convert that. What is the purpose of extracting columns? The purpose of extracting columns is seeing all the different values that you have instead of having to print all this and go, okay, rows 1 to 10, these are the values they have for departure time. Then rows 11 to 20, these are the values they have. So it makes it much easier, especially with bigger data sets, to see all the range of things that you're getting. Okay, great. That's it. Any last questions before we move on to the breakout rooms and start working on the homework? And I'll be uploading this new file to the resources drive. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop sharing, stop recording.